Yep.
Hi, and welcome back to the When Words Fail, Music Speaks podcast. I'm Amanda Dolan, and I'm joined by my co-host, James Cox, along with Ben Makinen. Ben is a filmmaker, executive producer, writer, director, and composer with over 40 years of professional experience. He is the founder of Be Makin' Films, or Be Makin' Films,
Yeah.
and International Modern Film Alliance. And he is also a voting member of the Grammys Recording Academy Producers and Engineers Wing. He is currently in post-production of your second feature-length music documentary, We Are Here, Women in Jazz, which examines the gender gap in jazz today.
Yes.
Did I get any of that right?
That's wonderful, Amanda. Thank you. Since the time that was written, I'm actually in post-production with my third feature length. The Echoes of Tradition turned out to be my
that one
second.
came out. Okay.
It just kind of leapfrogged. It was born before the Women in Jazz.
Really?
So I'm in post-production with We Are Here, Women in Jazz, and in the course of making that, the Echoes of Tradition, the Native American role in the birth of jazz, kind of came out first. It just had to be born, as it were.
Yeah.
And you asked this question of several people, I think, in your films. So I'm going to ask you the hard question: what is jazz?
Actually, let me ask one a little bit more concise. What is jazz to you? Because in your documentary, which I love, by the way, it's truly a masterpiece. You interviewed Charles Burrell, which is a bassist, correct? And
That's right.
He says, I can't explain it. It's not explainable. It is a feeling. You either have it or you don't have it. Do you share the same sentiment, or do you have other ideas of what jazz is to you?
Thank you, James. That's great. In essence, I do agree. Charles Burrell, the man you referred to, who, by the way, is the last living human being on Earth to have played with Billie Holiday.
Wow.
He's going to be 104 years old in just a couple of weeks. On October 4, he's going to turn 104. Charles Burrell not only played bass with all of the great jazz musicians, the Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Charlie Parker, Billie Holiday. He was the first African American to be hired by a major U.S. symphony back in the late 1940s. So,
wow.
So he's astounding. He, by the way, Charles Burrell, there's a great book on him that ought to be mandatory reading at the universities on the history of not only race relations in America, but jazz and classical music. And I think it's just called The Life of Charles Burrell. And then there's a little tagline, but it's by Mitch Handelsman. It's an amazing book because Charles speaks very openly and clearly about growing up as a black man in America through the 1930s and 40s. He's worked his way through racism to become to have materialized his dreams. His dream was to become a classical bassist in a symphony, and everyone told him, no, you will never be able to do that. He had teachers purposely teach him the wrong way so that he wouldn't be able to take an audition because they knew he wouldn't be hired anyway. So racism, obstacles to this guy broke down all these barriers. And anyway, so James, you're right. He says it's a feeling that you can't describe. And that's an important starting point, because when you talk to experts in jazz, they're inevitably going to say things about jazz that other people disagree with. It's complicated. It is a feeling, but we can analyze it and zero it in, because there are things about jazz that differentiate it from all other musics around the world. And so I'll get into that. There was one other thing I wanted to say. Oh, along the lines of Charles Burrell, one of my inspirations for making the first film, Jazztown, was another book I read by a great jazz drummer named Art Taylor. his book's called Notes and Tones. Art Taylor was a famous jazz drummer that played with all of the greats as well, like Miles Davis and John Coltrane. Art Taylor went and asked these people, what is jazz? And in this book, you can see that there's no consensus, even among the greatest players of the jazz history. So it's complex. But to me, building off of what Charles says, and this is maybe even just as enigmatic, but jazz is a magical buffet table that continuously expands to make room for new dishes brought to share. And by that, what I mean is jazz began as a culmination of or of a stew, a mixture of a lot of different musical influences that were percolating in America in the late 1800s. Specifically, experts tend to agree it happened in Louisiana, in the New Orleans area. We like to say New Orleans because that was one of the largest shipping ports in the Western Hemisphere. It had a tremendous influx of international flavors and sounds and people. The music that came out of that was multicultural. There were many different flavors coming together. Well, to this day, jazz continues to be an open buffet table. Whether it's Mongolian music, whether it's Chinese, whether it's Peruvian folkloric music, the musics of the world are welcomed with open arms in the spirit of inclusivity by jazz musicians. I personally think one of the things that separates jazz is in the late 1800s. We have the African American, the descendants of the slave culture, which had been living side by side and actually intermarried with the Native American culture. The Native American culture having been here first, of course, the first people, the indigenous people. So within that mix, we had an oppressed peoples, the descendants of slaves with the Native Americans, and over time, other minority cultures that came in as immigrants to America ended up living in various states of oppression. And one of the necessary things people of oppression need to do is to express themselves. They need to express the freedom of spirit that is in all of us. And I think the need to do that is more compelling. It's closer to the surface than the oppression that the oppressors may have felt in their distant past. So in other words, what happens is oppressed people who have been severed from their own narrative, from their own indigenous cultures, specifically like the African American slaves, who had no historic basis to pull their narrative from, had to recreate it in this new culture. And the Native Americans, similarly, the Native Americans who are suffering from a near genocide, and by being pushed off of their native lands, were losing their historic narrative as well. So in the course of recreating this, this is long-winded, but I'm getting there. One of the essences of jazz music is this is a music that possibly for the first time in, recorded history, people played music decoupled, uncoupled from a cultural or necessity to serve the community. In other words, music has traditionally been played to serve a communal need, whether it's the rituals, whether it's a wedding, a funeral, or the needs of the government. Let's say military music, nationalistic music. So music served a purpose of a community, and therefore it was important to play that music fairly true to the way it was written, composed, and and performed. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you perform music for the king, you played it the way it was expected to be played, and your sons and daughters grew up learning to play the music the same way because it was serving a very important need. If you played music for weddings, it's a very similar thing. You know, if you played music for your gods, for ceremonies to honor the spirits, the changing of the seasons, the harvest, that music was very sacred. So you didn't, I was going to swear, you didn't mess with it. You didn't tweak it. That kind of music didn't invite and encourage the individual to start free-forming on a riff, you know, while you're praying to your gods or honoring your kings and queens. Okay, jazz came along and was played by a people who are like, screw you guys. I don't need to, you know, I'm not here to honor your system, the system that's oppressing us. But at the same time, I want to express the joy and the pain and the sanctity. You know, I want to be able to honor my spirits, my ancestors, my daughter's wedding. You know, I still want to party and mourn. So they found a way of letting their individual needs shape a music that was already existent in their culture. Let's say, and this is where we get into, where did jazz come from? Well, it was a combination of parade music, you know, marches. It was a combination of the blues, of church hymns, of folkloric, you know, campfire songs, minstrelsy, opera. You know, jazz used whatever was available: the banjo, the drum, the piano, the horn, and it used, right? So it combined everything, the resources that were naturally available, so to speak. And then they found a way to let their own individual needs shape that music. That's where the freedom of expression and the improvisation exists all over the world from day one. Humans are improvisatory. We're improvisational, that we need to survive. How to make a fire, how to make a shelter, right? But, and of course, our ancestors improvised music. It was one, you know, so arguably, and there are some people, I'm going off the path here. Vaughn Freeman was a great saxophone player in Chicago. He, in an interview, kind of made a reference to a quote from some sacred text, perhaps it was the Bible even, that as a way of suggesting that jazz music goes back thousands of years, the idea of improvising to honor a greater spirit. That being said, jazz, as we tend to define it, came out of this period in America. The jazz we talk about was only found in America. It was born here because America had this incredible melting pot of influences from around the world, like funneling in at a massive rate into New Orleans, into this shipping port. You know, we had people coming from all over the world bringing music and instruments. So to me, I'll pause there.
Okay.
Well, no, I know. I think James too. Like I'm like, okay, I don't need any of these other questions that
I
we
think
talked about. Like
I
but I have like stuff that I want to ask about what you just said. But I think James might too. So
yeah, but can I go first, man? Okay.
yeah,
so
go.
I'm so excited that you're here. Okay, so in your documentary Jazz Sound, like we said before, everybody should go watch it when it's released. Freddie Rodriguez Sr. said that every genre has come from jazz, right? So we got his side, okay? A lot of people say that it's the blues. According to you, what do you think is the most true statement there is? Because I know you just said jazz pulls from every other genre. So do you think that jazz started the whole music vibe that we know today?
That's a great question, James. I feel there's a couple of things when we talk about jazz and the blues and Afro-Cuban, the Caribbean. When we talk about the elements that created jazz, which then arguably gave birth to all of the modern American music, it's important to go back and be careful with our definitions because and I don't anticipate an argument here, but people who listen, and you see this on YouTube a lot, people get sidetracked very quickly because many of us have different definitions of these terms: jazz, blues, rock, hip hop, Afro-Cuban. What are these things? So to be clear,
Music.
Music. Yeah, actually, Amanda, you're right. Music. Some people say birds are actually talking to themselves. They're not making songs for us. Well, we hear birds as music. I do. I hear the sound of trains and diesel engines and rocks tumbling at the beach. That's all music. But you're right. So here's the thing, James. I agree. Freddie Rodriguez Sr. in my film Jazztown. Freddie was one of my mentors as well. He played with the greats in Los Angeles in his early career in the 1960s. Actually, Freddie famously played at the Lighthouse, which was kind of glorified in that movie La La Land.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
You remember that movie?
Yes.
With Ryan Gosling? Okay, and Emma Stone. They famously walk in front of the Lighthouse. Anyway, Freddie Rodriguez played there. I kind of made an ode to that. There's one quick shot in Jazztown of there's a screenshot from the movie La La Land that I snuck in the movie. Anyway, Freddie's right. The blues, which is one component of what turned into what we call jazz. Here's another little tricky thing. The word blues was not used as a genre adjective. Or I'm sorry, it wasn't used as a noun to describe a genre of music at first. The blues was an adjective. It was a feeling. So people would talk about, I've got the blues, like I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling lonely.
Right.
I lost my job. My wife left me. So I'm feeling blue, or I've got the blues. But they weren't calling it the blues music. That came later. Similar with jazz. The word jazz wasn't used to apply to music until arguably 1915. Some people debate that, but that, as far as my research shows, 1915 is about the earliest we see people using the word jazz to describe a kind of music. The word jazz existed, but that's another thing. The point being, the music that we now call jazz was being played arguably in the late 1800s. So my point is, again, when you start talking to people about jazz, one person might think jazz starts in 1920, with Louis Armstrong playing some of his first recorded solos. Other people might be like, no. Jazz started closer to the 1900s with Jelly Roll Morton playing piano. And other people are like, no. Okay.
Right.
But your question, James, if your question is where did, rock and roll and hip hop, and yes, those things I believe could only have developed because of the development of jazz. And here's an example. Excuse me. Rock and roll, which comes from rhythm and blues, which comes from the swing music. By the time the big bands were swinging in the 1930s, those musicians, I'm going to speak specifically to the drummers. The drummers are the ones who started playing in the 1940s in what became known as the R&B bands. So it was a simplified, we still had horns with saxophones and trumpets, but we were coming out of going away from the bebop, the complexity of the bebop music, but the melodic dance vibe of the old big bands in smaller groups. So now we have 5, 6, or 7 people on stage as opposed to 20, still playing with the jazz dance vibe, but the swing rhythm kind of became stronger. Bap ba doom, bap ba doom, bap ba doom. It wasn't beboppy, pa-da-doom, scat, skidoo-doom, ba-da, boo-doom, scum, ba-doom, right? And out of the desire to keep people dancing, to play really, let's just say upbeat party music, R&B started to become rock and roll. The drummers who started playing in these rock bands began their life learning to play jazz drums. So the jazz rhythm, the dang, back a dang, pop a dang, pop a ding ding, got ding ding ding, got doon doon got doon doon got my Sharona, ba dang, da da, right?
Yeah. That's awesome.
It's a subtle, simple shift from swing to straight eighth note, and the jazz drummers were the guys and gals there making that transition. Not necessarily saying I'm going to invent rock and roll, but that's kind of what happened. And that couldn't have happened without, what came before. We build on the shoulders of what came before us. Oftentimes, whether we know it or not, because a lot of times we got to remember this too. Innovation in music tends to come from teenagers and 20-year-olds. Even when we think of old-timey jazz, if you want, a lot of people think of Louis Armstrong. Okay, Louis Armstrong, and then they get a picture of Louis Armstrong as the friendly old grandfather guy singing "What a Wonderful World." Well, yeah. he was in his 60s and 70s at that point. But when he started to innovate the music that became jazz, his contribution to the innovation of jazz, he was 20 years old. These innovators are young. It's not like they sit around and study music history and read books and study records and then go, let's see how we can continue the evolution of it. No, they get together with their buddies in the basement. They go jam at parties and they go with their feelings, which is oftentimes, running away from what your parents did or you're right. So you get these jazzers doing something a little different that may be thumbing their nose at old jazz, and then we got rock and roll. So I don't know if that answered your question, James, but without going into what blues is, yes. And actually, the early Appalachian music, there was a lot of music going on here in America, what might be called country blues, ragtime, syncopation. There's a lot of folkloric music happening in the pockets of Americana that would come. Some of these people would come from the hillsides, as it were, or come down the river and meet in New Orleans, and then quickly out of New Orleans disseminate back across the country. So there's this cross contamination, if you will. Yeah. Like if you were born in St. Louis and then ended up spending a year in New Orleans, hanging with some New Orleans guys, and then going on tour through Texas, where you already have a tradition of Texas swing and Mexicana, because the Mexicans are in Texas, because Texas was Mexico, right?
Yes.
So suddenly you've got musicians on trains, on boats, on cars, crisscrossing the country. It's an amazing, it's like seeds blowing through the wind and cross-pollinating America with all kinds of different plants.
I'm having this so it was Diane Reeves in Jazztown. I think it was like the opening scene, because it caught me, where she said, "Jazz is freedom, a spirit passed soul to soul." And when I think of jazz too, and especially with what you just said, there was a certain amount of freedom that came around in that late 1800, early 1900 time frame, right? With slaves being free, the Industrial Revolution, kicking off, trains. So we were more mobile and more connected than previously.
That's quite right. You're exactly right, Amanda. It's an astounding confluence of the Civil War coming to an end, the Emancipation Proclamation. And a lot of people, as a side, they'll say, some people might say, yeah, but the slaves were never really free at that moment. Or the thing is, and that's a whole nother political reality, but they felt it. When the announcement was made, there was this joyous release, and we see that in the parade bands of New Orleans. You're right, there was an explosion of freedom. Suddenly people were free to leave the South and go north if they wanted to pursue the American dream. There was this great mechanization, as you say, which created brought more ease to transportation. Like you say, the trains. In fact, one of the world's most famous jazz drummers, who helped establish jazz swing feel, his name was Papa Joe Jones. He writes in his own book that the trains, listening to the trains at night, was really influential. Cha-cha-cha-chan, 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 to the swing rhythm, which is also found in the Native American stomp dances that I highlight in my newest film, Echoes of Tradition. Cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha. The women would put shells, tortoise shells, or cans filled with beads and stones, and when doing a simple shuffle step around a fire, cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha, we've got those jazz rhythms. So, but your point is right. Interestingly enough, I'm totally geeking out on this period, but the late 1800s was also the development of the camera, of movies, and pretty soon after, and of records. A couple decades later, we have the radio, but some people have made the case that if it weren't for records, which started off as wax cylinders, but the idea of disseminating this.
I got a lot of them right there. Yeah.
You are the man, James. I love if it weren't for records, some people argue jazz might have remained a folkloric music native just to like the South, to Louisiana. But because so many early jazz musicians, Bix Beiderbecke, Lester Young, these people that came up in the 1920s, heard jazz on records, right? Because not everyone came to New Orleans to listen to music in a club, obviously. The technology, Amanda, you speak of, records and people traveling on trains, and those records being shipped out on trains and river boats and cars across America, helped quickly disseminate jazz, not only across America, but by 1920, we had jazz appearing in Bombay, in India, in Shanghai, in China, in Indonesia. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
There was another, like you kind of touched on it several times.
Sorry, Amanda, going back, you're right. Diane Reeves spoke eloquently towards, again, in Jazztown, she's talked about the spirit of jazz. Diane Reeves is actually the niece of Charles Burrell. And
Wow.
Of course she is.
But what they speak, one reason why what they're speaking to is so important, it seems mystical, but so when we use words to describe, we can get so sidetracked. Jazz was traditionally taught, or the torch was passed by spending time with a person on stage where this energy and this feeling was transferred, because a lot of jazz is the way your body moves, the way the group moves together, the way this music makes you feel and move, the way it resonates with the audience. And suddenly you've got this feedback loop. This energy of the music is going into the people who are dancing it back to you, who are inspiring you, because you're watching the dancers and now you're playing with them. It's this incredible feedback loop that does not exist in a book or in a university classroom. Right. You know, at best, we can have the most well-intentioned people using the greatest words ever to try to convey that. But at the end of the day, you know, you're trying to teach someone what is warmth when you're standing in an igloo, you know. Yeah. I don't know. You know?
Yeah. So like what you're saying is when words fail, music speaks.
Exactly.
She shoots, she scores.
Okay. Just there's so many places I want to go. Just quickly, I think it's interesting, the storyteller, the like folklore piece, which I think we all have, like everyone has those like family stories or those like the lore of the area around you, but everyone tells that story just a little different in their own way. It's the same story, but it's got your own spin on it. And when I think of like classical music, and I'm talking like, Brahms lullaby or Mozart, those sorts of classics, I think of it as so like it's in this box. You don't change the notes, you don't stray from what was written. And I think of jazz as classical music that you get to make your own when you play it. Like it becomes there's a framework, I think, in a song, but when you're performing, it's however your heart moves sometimes.
Yeah, Amanda, I think you've put your finger on a really important element of jazz. I'm gonna I'm gonna qualify it a little bit because you opened up some pretty interesting topics. One thing, you're right, jazz has almost at its foundation the expectation that you as an individual are going to contribute something of your own experience into the music. If you're playing, if a jazz musician is playing someone else's song, the idea is kind of like, well, what's the original intent of the song? Okay, and now should I maintain that spirit or that narrative, and if so, to what degree? Or are we going to really just use that as a launching pad? In other words, the freedom there is to do whatever you want with the initial narrative. Either build on it, or either just honor it as it is, or add your own addition, like you said, of family. What the point you made about the family narrative is really important, Amanda, because this goes back to something I learned speaking with R. Carlos Nakai, the great Native American flute player. I interviewed him for Echoes of Tradition. He's been nominated for a Grammy 11 times. He's kind of a bridge between traditional Native American music and contemporary explorations. He started doing this in the 80s. And at first he was kind of labeled New Age jazz. But the point is, he said as a youth growing up in Native cultures and talking to his elders, he had these visions of taking traditional Native vocal music that he heard chanted, and he thought, how would that sound on a flute? And then he thought, well, he didn't even think. His inspiration was to make variations on it. And he told me that look, Ben, these Native songs, a big part of Native song is carrying the news, the family story, as you say, Amanda. Well, if you just tell the family story of your family 300 years ago, you're not really conveying, the evolution of our family. You're not sharing any current news. So the songs have to change to invite in the new family narratives. So you don't change your history, but you can add on to it. And from a song perspective, that means the song has to change if you're going to honor your place in this moment and time, and if you're going to be of service to your community. There's entertaining, and then if you're also trying to convey information, then you've got, so this goes back to the classical thing, and you're right that the classical tradition has been basically for one person to compose a piece that a group then faithfully reproduces. There is a tradition in classical music where some areas of that composition were expected to be improvised. One example is in the drum parts, like the timpani parts. Nobody knew how to write music for drums 150 plus years ago. It wasn't standardized. Right. It wasn't codified. Some people just assumed drummers couldn't read music anyway. But
oh no.
So I wish Chris was here. Our other co-host is a drummer, and I wish he was here to hear all of your.
Oh man, drummers have so many bad jokes about them.
I love drummers to death. I think they're the best ever.
Oh, God bless you, James. Thank you. Well, but the point being is, a lot of classical music had, for example, the timpani part was improvised or just sketched out, right? Sometimes there were cadenzas, open ends, open areas at the end of a song where maybe the violinist. Planting the seed that not all classical music was as rigid as people like to say it is today. It's become that. It's become institutionalized, and it's become expected that the players are only there to serve the conductor, and that the conductor is the only one allowed to interpret the music. That's become part of the institutionalization of this music for sure. But you're right. Classical musicians basically sit down with the music in front of them, and the expectation is that they are simply there to read the notes on the page and follow the interpretation of a conductor. Jazz musicians get that same piece of music, and from the get-go, they're like, okay, how am I going to do this my way?
Exactly. Yeah. I do have a question about that. Okay, so I do have a comment, and feel free to elaborate. And then I got a question for what you just said. I love drummers the best because our co-host is a drummer. You know, I got to be biased, right? But but I like jazz. They're visually they look a lot better than rock music, country music, because drummers have only one of each item. You know, because if you look at the say like Megadeth drummer, he's got 18 like kits, you know, 18 drum heads, 14 cymbals. I'm like, you don't need all that stuff. You know, it's just because I saw you playing in Jazztown, and you had the most simplistic thing ever, and you killed it. You know, so that's
Thank you.
yeah. So I don't know why like rock music has to be so outlandish when jazz music gets the same job done better, and it's less, you know, instruments. I just think that's fantastic.
Well, thank you, James. I understand where you're coming from,
Yeah.
and I think one of the points you're making is jazz musicians in general traditionally they play a more acoustic based music, which almost by definition demands that they explore all of the textural elements of their instrument, and all of the dynamic range. You know, their job is to find the extremes or the full spectrum of our expressiveness of the human voice. Really, in jazz music, the drummer and the piano player and the trumpet player, we're all trying to vocalize emotions on some level, and that's why we're challenged to take one instrument and explore it in its entirety. Take one drum and play it from its edge to its middle, to its edge, to its side, you know, use a stick, use a brush, use our fingers. That's just part of allowing an instrument to express its full capacity to speak or to sing. In defense of the rock and roll drummers, because I love rock and roll too, and I've played it.
Yeah, that's my favorite. Yeah.
One of the reasons why they do that is for entertainment. I mean, let's face it.
Yeah.
To put 18 cymbals up, it's an amazing show of, you got it, Amanda.
And they're in the back too, so they gotta
go in the back.
they gotta make sure they're seen. They're behind everyone.
Yeah.
And to the defense of rock music, a huge part of that is, of course, show. I mean, if you're playing in an auditorium to 80,000 people, you know, this just isn't, you know, I'm playing
right. Yeah.
it's just not as, but also it's a valid, they're expressing a very valid range of emotion too. Off the charts, amplified, high power, you know, boosh, bash, boosh, boosh, bash. In a way, and you've just made me think of this, they're kind of channeling a component of dance. You know, if you think of dancing and spinning and letting your arms, you know, jazz to the degree that jazz has taken that away, modern jazz, let's say, intellectual jazz.
Right.
The rock and rollers are internalizing the dance on stage. So you've got guitarists making big motions, right? That's dancing with the music. That's screaming. That's screaming in a way that jazz has kind of tempered,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But seriously, there's no need for like 48 symbols. I mean,
I was-
3 or 4
well,
symbols
and
work, brother. I mean, Jesus.
That's right.
since jazz sort of started small and it was, like you said, it was what was available. If you're traveling,
Yeah.
especially 100 years ago, 80 years ago, you can't, well, I guess you could, but carrying a drum kit of that size might become prohibitive.
Well, Amanda, you nailed it. That's exactly what one of the first, this all happened within jazz music. One of the first um, external pressures to make things smaller was exactly that. A drummer, the early jazz drummers were playing large bass drums, 24-inch or bigger, really big bass drums. And when jazz started to become popular in New York City, for example, and the drummers had 3 or 4 gigs in a day, from the afternoon, through the evening, they had to get all around New York City, and carrying that big drum was a pain in the butt. And you couldn't fit it into a taxi, or getting it onto a train, even a moving trolley was hard. There's a great story about a drummer, Baby Dodds was one of the early drummers from New Orleans, who tells this story about in New York having to put his drums on a slowly moving train, put one on, put another one on, put another one on, and then jump into the train.
Right.
So what happened, the drummers started taking these big drums and they had them made smaller. So now you could get into a taxi cab with maybe 2 drums, a bass drum and a snare drum and a ride cymbal and a hi-hat. Boom. And then you're good to go. So you're right, Amanda. The need to be mobile was a component of bringing things smaller. Ironically, when trucks and bigger cars were made, that coincided with rock and roll, right? Now guys are traveling around in station wagons and they can throw a lot of amps and drums in their car.
Right.
But it is interesting because the early jazz drummers were playing drums bigger than today's rock and rollers.
Okay.
Not necessarily more, but bigger. The bass drum was big.
Yeah.
And just since we're on this, if you look at some pictures of Sonny Greer, was Duke Ellington's drummer, one of Duke Ellington's earliest drummers. Sonny Greer would be on stage with a set of chimes and some gongs, and they were interested in a stage show as well, putting on a lot, surrounding themselves with a lot of percussion, because it's an entertainment value. There's a component of putting on a show.
Yeah.
And I think jazz, and we're going like stereotype, right? Jazz is the smoky nightclub, not very many people. It's very intimate. And so like you touch on that, like communication, that dance back and forth with the audience, with the people that are part of the performance as much as they are watching the performance, I think. Because like as a jazz musician, do you read the crowd like as you're performing and give them more of what it seems like they love?
Well, Amanda, you ask great questions. That ideally, yes. I mean, but actually, some musicians disagree. This is a point I cover in my second short film, Who Killed Jazz? And specifically Purnell Steen. This is another wild connection. I used to play in Purnell's band. Purnell is a piano player who is a nephew of Charles Burrell. So, like, Diane Reeves is Purnell's cousin. It all
connects,
Can I just
right?
meet Charles Burrell, please?
Right,
Thank
yeah.
you. Where
Yeah.
where does
Well,
he live?
but,
And can I just knock on his door?
He lives in Denver. It's an assisted living home now. I'll try to make a post, but if you keep your eyes on Facebook, someone should be doing something big for his birthday coming up on the 4th of October. But
I
But
may just have to go visit my mom in Colorado.
There you go. Boom, and I'll
And
go with you.
she's-
Yeah.
She's in Fort Collins, so I could.
oh yeah, yeah. Let's just depending on traffic, an hour and a half down south
Yeah.
from Fort
Easy.
Collins. I used to play in Fort Collins a lot, but here's the thing about what you said. One of the reasons some people think jazz has lost its popularity, because actually, Amanda, back in the 1930s, jazz was being played to huge ballrooms, and the Smoky Club thing, the small clubs with 10 people in, that began happening in the 1940s when jazz started to become less about dance. It's easy to say more intellectual, but it just became less about dancing. But in the 1930s, like, check this out. There was a big band leader named Artie Shaw. Artie Shaw played the clarinet. Now, just as a reference, when I was a kid in junior high school, this would be in the late 1970s, if a boy was playing clarinet, he was called a,
Yeah.
you know,
We're not gonna say,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
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 It was a gendered instrument. At least when I was brought up, it was considered very uncool. Well, in the 1930s, the clarinet was like the electric guitar.
Yeah.
And so women were actually taking their bras off and throwing it on stage to Artie Shaw playing jazz clarinet.
Awesome.
Seriously. Women were taking their clothes off, not totally naked because it's the 1930s.
Right. Yeah. Almost.
But here's my point to answer your question, Amanda. So at that point, the bands were playing for the people, for dance, and the really artistic big band musicians were trying to find a balance between playing a music that they felt was artistically satisfying, and innovating, progressing, versus keeping their audiences happy who wanted to hear the hit songs that they just bought on the record that you made 5 months ago. So there was a balance. But yeah, the band leaders were constantly struggling with keeping the musicians in their band happy, because a lot of the musicians are like, come on, man, let's kick this, let's do something fresh. And they were saying, let's keep our audience dancing and happy. Point is, a lot of the great music of that golden era of jazz, of the swing era, was this great feedback loop with the dancers. When that went away, when the jazz musicians stopped playing for the dancers, it became, this goes back to what you said. Were the musicians engaging the audience in any way, intellectually, emotionally, to the degree that would make them want to keep coming back? Some musicians did, and some musicians didn't care. And they say, you're here to hear me make my art. In the same way that a painter would say, you don't come here to tell me what to paint. I'm going to paint a picture and put it on the wall, and that's my art, and you can pay the admission to come into the museum or not.
Right.
Right.
But that's a great question. And to this day, you have jazz musicians who won't get hired back into a club because the audience is going like, what are you doing? And the musicians are saying, we're here to educate you and to show you what art really is. And there's a balance that needs to be found.
So I know you said that like jazz was shared through records all over.
Uh-huh.
But then I know that one of the reasons, like with my ADHD brain, I like the same songs because I know exactly, like I can sing along. I know what I'm going to get. So I'm curious if while records helped spread jazz, if it was a little bit of the death of jazz because people started to hear the song over and over again, whatever it was. And so they wanted what they listened to every time instead of some improvisation that came along.
Good point.
Amanda, that's an amazingly great question, and I'm fascinated that did you just think of that now?
Yeah, I did. Sorry. Yeah, you were talking. And I was like, oh.
Off the cuff.
Well, you know what's amazing, Amanda? No, Amanda, your question goes back to the very heart of one of the innovators of jazz who was approached to record. His name was Freddie Keppard. Freddie Keppard was one of the earliest jazz trumpet players, again, at a time when people weren't calling it jazz yet. So he was in New Orleans in the late 1800s and began touring around the US by the 1910s, maybe a little earlier. Freddie Keppard, okay, this is really interesting. I'll try to be short to answer your question. The short answer is yes. You're right, Amanda. But what's amazing about your perceptive question is that when this recording technology came out, arguably one of the first jazz musicians approached, Freddie Keppard, told the record labels no. For what you just said, Amanda, he was afraid. He knew that by putting this music that changed organically every time it was played, and thus was jazz, if you recorded it, it would freeze it, it would shackle it, it would enslave the music that was just freed. Those aren't Freddie's words, those are mine, but no one knew why Freddie Keppard said no. He told the recording company, Victor Talking Machine Company, this company then found the original Dixieland Jazz Band, ODJB. ODJB, and interestingly, not to get into race politics yet, ODJB was a band of guys, arguably you could call them white. Now these guys came out of an Italian and Americans band in New Orleans that was mixed race. Really. Right. These guys were, in early America, a lot of immigrants, whether Jewish, Mexican, Italian, they didn't call themselves white because they weren't treated as whites with all of the, with all of the trimmings, with all of the, what's the word fancied now, with all of the privilege. They didn't have the privilege of white culture, so they didn't call themselves white or treated. This is an important distinction. I don't want to argue it now because a lot of people will say ODJB, the original Dixieland Jazz Band, were white guys. Let's put that aside. What a lot of people agree is that the ODJB made the first jazz record in 1917. I actually found research. I can argue that now's not the time. There was a record made earlier than that, the year prior. But the point is, people say, well, why did this record company find a group of white guys to make the first jazz record? Well, this same company approached Freddie Keppard. Freddie Keppard was Creole, trumpet player. I said Creole, and then I do the trumpet sign.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so Freddie's from New Orleans. Freddie's a mixed race. He's mixed European, African, arguably Caribbean. Point is, you could say he's black. He wasn't, again, for reasons of the similar, right? For reasons what I said to James, we really should define jazz, blues, black, white. Those and American and Native, those are terms that when you get into these conversations with people, you really should have some kind of agreement on what those are defined, because you can spin off quickly into these little minutia. But the point is, your question, Amanda, is amazing, because Freddie Keppard, who should have been recorded, said no because he knew that this technology he felt strongly that the technology would crush the spirit of the music. And that was only found out years later when one of Freddie Keppard's peers, and I believe this was Sidney Bechet. Sidney Bechet was another Creole clarinetist, one of the innovators of jazz, right along Louis Armstrong. Sidney Bechet was one of the earliest to sort of become a virtuosic solo musician. And Sidney went from the clarinet to the soprano saxophone. Sidney Bechet, everyone in New Orleans is like, why didn't Freddie take the recording contract? Why didn't he, when they found out, and no one could get a straight answer from Freddie. He wouldn't verbalize, he couldn't use the words to verbalize what he finally told Sidney Bechet. Sidney Bechet took the words that Freddie told him and kind of created the conclusion that I have repeated for you here. So that hints back to the sanctity, to the sacred, to how deeply felt this music was to some of the early innovators. It kind of ties into that. You've probably heard the story of how certain indigenous people don't want their photograph taken because it felt it would capture their soul.
Right.
I think, yeah, same. And it's really impressive to me that you intuited that. Now, obviously, the great musicians overcame that. The recording, jazz is loved around the world because of records. That did introduce another challenge, which was just like you, and I'm the same, Amanda. There are records I play 1,000 times or CDs in my car because I love just the way it goes, and it just triggers this emotional thing every time. The musicians had to struggle with finding a balance between giving the people what they expected, which was the record version, versus inviting them into the spirit of, hey, look, there's a new guy on saxophone, or hey, there's a new gal playing trumpet. She's going to play the solo different tonight. Hello.
I think I'm fascinated by all of this, and I think I don't know, James, do you have a question?
Oh yeah, okay. Well, yeah, well, let's do mine and then yours, and then we'll wrap it up because I know it's now, and we're
taking up all kinds of time, but I would love to
It's
keep talking.
It's crazy. It's so fun. Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
I'm learning so much.
I love this conversation. Yeah.
Well, I'll let James, and then I'll get
okay.
into my question. And
okay, Ben. Okay, so me and Amanda really, really, really love cover songs. Okay. We have a whole other series dedicated to that. I'm not sure if you like cover songs, but I feel like you like them too, right? Yeah, they're.
I love them.
Yes. So,
James, actually, most of jazz today is arguably cover songs. The jazzers, they call them standards.
Okay.
They use the word standards, but it really means cover song.
Okay, perfect. So that's what I was going to ask you. So on your Jazztown documentary, which everybody should get, I'm gonna blow it up.
Did it again?
Yes.
Is that where you were going?
Yes. Okay. So please help me with this name because I'll butcher it. Okay. Is it Reka or Ohel?
You're very close. Reka Ohel.
Ohel. Okay. So she has. Okay. So in the documentary, she does what Amanda just graced us with is her cover of Britney Spears, right? But then she says that her band members don't like doing cover songs. Okay, so my question to you is it is that like a big no-no in jazz, or do they like to do their own like stuff? You know what I'm saying? I don't know if I came across.
James, you nailed it. That's a brilliant question. You nailed it perfectly. It's a huge point of contention, and what Reka hints at there is what I'm talking to Amanda about the old big band leaders. Yeah. Reka as a band leader had to sort of like a shepherd. She had to cajole her band members to play these tunes. And Duke Ellington made a great joke once. The way, he said, you have to come up with different techniques to keep your band members to stay in your band. And the interviewer said, what is that? And he said, I pay them money.
Right.
So James, a lot of jazz musicians pride themselves. They're jazz snobs. Let's just be honest.
Okay.
There's a jazz snobbery element that's so hypocritical because the jazz musicians the jazz snobs study the songs that were cover songs 80 years ago, 80, 70, 60 years ago, great old Broadway show tunes, for example. right? Those have now become, they went from Tin Pan Alley, they got picked up by a producer who asked Miles Davis or Nat King Cole to do their own version of it. Boom, it takes off. Frank Sinatra, Frank Sinatra, Nancy Wilson covers a pop song. It becomes a jazz standard. 50, 60 years later, jazz snob musicians are studying those songs, but they won't learn a Michael Jackson song or a Britney Spears song or a Beyonce song because they think that's beneath them. Because pop songs are written with 1, 2, or 3 chords. And for some reason, jazz musicians who study a bazillion chords think that that's beneath them. And the irony is jazz can take anything, 1 chord, 1 string, like a 1-string banjo, a 1-string bass, like you said, James, earlier, 1 drum. And the great spirit of improvisation takes 1 thing and can tell your family's narrative. It can make you cry. It can make you dance. That's what great musicianship does. It doesn't even have to be jazz, but that's what the spirit of improvisation and the spirit of a great musician does. So what Reka points to is the ongoing struggle of dealing with, musicians who are really the instruments of a band, and a band leader trying to surround themselves with people who are malleable enough to try, come on guys, let's try something new, which is what jazz is supposed to be about. But these jazz musicians, a lot of them who are coming out of universities, have kind of lost that spirit of jumping into a cover song, like you say, which is so ironic because almost every jazz song you love is a cover.
The covers, right. Well, to go off the chord thing you just mentioned, there was a gentleman, I forget his name, on your Jazztown documentary, that he's just sitting there playing chords, and I didn't notice until I watched them. You could hear after every chord, you could hear sadness, happiness, thoughtfulness, and just 1 chord. I never heard that at all until now.
That's right. You're speaking of Ron Bucknam.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for bringing that up, James. Ron was a dear friend of mine who, during the filming of Jazztown, was actually dying from cancer.
Oh no.
And he was so dialed in to making and sharing his music and his philosophy with us because he knew he wasn't going to be around much longer. And you're right. Ron Bucknam was a genius who nobody ever heard about because he stayed in his basement. And
that's
he worked in a bookstore to be able to pay his rent, and went down in his basement and made these genius compositions of sound. Going back to what Amanda said at the beginning, what is music? He would collect sounds and tweak his guitars. He would buy electronic drum instruments and go into the electronics and change them so that they did things they weren't meant to do. Well, his point is that the emotions that we all as humans feel in different capacities during our life, as an artist and a musician, he sought to channel those, to find the chords that channel those emotions. And then as a musician, how do we use those in a song to inspire, move ourselves and our audiences? How do we tell a story using the emotions of sound?
Yeah, it's because of him I will now start listening to deeper into what the song is because I never heard all he did was say 1 note and you can hear the emotion in it, and I never thought about it before. I never heard that before until I watched your documentary.
Wow,
so
that's great. That's great, James. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for bringing that up, and that actually ties right back to what Amanda was talking about, I believe. Which is how to play. I'm making a connection between what you said, how to play for your audiences. The great musicians actually break it down. They study their own response to sound, like you just did, James. And a great musician will go, when I play this, bring, it's going to make this emotion. And I need that emotion in this part of my lyric. Okay, so a singer is telling a song about how their dog ran away, and how it made them feel. So to recreate that on stage every night, they need to find the chords and the chord sequences and the notes and the combination of rhythm to be able to recreate that on demand in front of an audience. The trick with jazz musicians and creative people is how not to personally get bored with that, how to introduce enough change to where you can continue telling that story, not lose your audience, and still be true to yourself and what it is. And it's interesting. It's interesting. There are some great bands that do not change their covers. A friend of mine plays bass in the band Chicago.
Oh, really?
You know, yes.
Yeah.
And don't quote me on the degree of improvisation, but the greatness of a band like Chicago or the Rolling Stones or, or even Metallica, if you like that kind of, is because they go on stage and they play the same thing and it's just as great as it was 30 years ago.
Right.
They're not, their thing isn't necessarily about taking you on a journey of evolution and change. We're like going back to get into that same space and just rock it like we did, and maybe even cry together or just rock together. There's a genius to being able to recreate every night something of greatness too. And actors in the theater do that as well. Putting on the, I used to tour in Broadway shows, and I was amazed at how in the pit playing drums, watching these actors up on stage, I would start to cry at the same part every night, even though I knew it was fake.
Right. Every time, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
There are movies that I've watched a dozen times. I still cry at the same parts every time.
And
I
you
know what's
always
coming.
know-
It doesn't matter. I'm going to cry because
Yeah, 'cause
there's
you
the
all-
emotion to it.
You always know it's coming, and you're like, I'm not gonna cry. I'm not gonna cry. Oh, no.
I cry a lot anyway. I think there's so
Wow.
many questions that I want to ask, and I'm trying to first of all, I don't want to talk about. I live in Denton, Texas. UNT is University of North Texas is 3 miles from me, and I'm just gonna. The academics of music is something that is in the culture here.
Oh yeah.
where I
Oh,
live.
big time. Big time. You said you didn't want to.
I don't want to spend much time on that because I want to ask questions about. I have two things, and I'm trying to decide because we could talk about academics and music and their great programs and what they do, but maybe what there's I don't want to take all your time, and I have so many more questions.
I'm here. I'm here for you.
So one of the things that I think that I heard several times was that the academics and the intellectual part of jazz has made it so that it's only for the wealthy. It's a for people with money. How true
That's right.
is that?
That was a statement made by the great guitarist Charlie Hunter. Charlie Hunter, who tours a lot still to this day. Charlie Hunter said that he actually appears in both films, Jazztown, but that particular point was emphasized in the second film, Who Killed Jazz? And there is a lot of truth to that. What he's saying is access to learning jazz in the academy at the conservatory level or the university level is now restricted by, of course, the admission of tuition. Who can afford to go to college anymore? And there are, when he said that, he said there aren't as many scholarships, and that's true. But the tuition to go to one of the top jazz academies, and you're at UNT, right, North Texas. Yeah. One of my buddies actually is a professor of saxophone there. His name is Brad Leely. Brad Leely's from Denver. Talking about crying in movies. I'll get back. Brad watched Jazztown, and Brad is from Denver. And he and I grew up together. One of my mentors was his as well, of course. Billy Wallace was the piano player in Jazztown. Brad spent much more time with Billy Wallace than I did, and told me that when he watched Jazztown, he cried seeing Billy, his old mentor, because Billy was saying things in the movie that he had never told Brad, despite how much time they had spent mentoring each other. Billy Wallace was a piano player that played with Max Roach and Sonny Rollins. Those were two of the most famous bebop jazz musicians that came up in the 40s and 50s. But my point is, speaking to what you raised, the point about jazz is for the wealthy is a very legitimate thing that ties into the intellectualism. You get students of jazz who are able to get into either high performance high school, school of the arts, which even if, and my daughter went to one of those, even if there's no, you have to audition to get in. So even if there's no tuition, to pass an audition as a 14-year-old necessitates having had access to private instruction or just being very talented. So it's already rigged against the person who can't afford a private teacher, for example.
Right.
So but let's fast track. You've got fantastically talented kids, and this is nothing against the performers. No one can help where they're born or into what circumstances they're born. You've got very talented kids in high school who now want to go study jazz at the conservatories, and conservatories can be 80 grand a year or more. Plus, not to mention the cost of moving to, let's say, New York City and living. It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. So that's why someone like Charlie Hunter will say, because, okay, so here's what happened, the dynamic. What's happened to jazz over at least the last 25 years? Jazz in the nightclubs was starting to, I'll try to do this quickly. Jazz wasn't popular to begin with. You've got nightclubs where they make their money with people drinking. The laws in America started cracking down, rightfully so, on drunk driving. So by the late 1990s, fewer people were going from the suburbs or going from anywhere into the city, into the jazz clubs, because they didn't want to drive home drunk. Smart, but people stopped going out and drinking as much. So people weren't staying out late at the jazz clubs, they weren't drinking. Then you get the fact that the people interested in that kind of jazz were getting older. So even if they did come to the jazz clubs, they were drinking less.
Right.
They were drinking less and leaving earlier to take a taxi home. Well, so jazz clubs were starting to close or to switch to rock and roll or blues music or funk, because those audiences, knew how to drink. They were younger and they drank more.
Right.
The young people don't care about how they get home.
No,
In general.
right.
I mean,
Yes,
now they do, because people are getting smarter. But point is, what happened at that same time? So a jazz club didn't have anybody on a Monday night. What happened is the band directors realized this is a stroke of genius. The band directors started making deals with club owners and said, I'll bring my big band, my group of 15 kids playing jazz music in on a Monday night. You don't have to pay us anything. I'll bring my kids in, we'll bring their parents. Their parents will buy a ticket and will buy the beer and the food from your bar. Now you've got 30 parents of art school musicians in a nightclub on a Monday night, spending hundreds, if not close to $1,000, right? You get 30 people buying a glass of wine and a steak or a cheeseburger. These clubs are making money on a Monday night with jazz. Okay, the kids' children are innocent. This is great for them. What's happening though is the teenagers are now playing underneath the spotlight in a suit or, on a stage with microphones with a professional sound person, because this is a professional sound club. These kids are getting a professional experience that they would never have got before. The way that used to happen is that if you were good enough, you'd get on tour with a big band. I'm talking the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. You'd learn how to play jazz on a big band by being the young kid with the big guys, right? And you'd get your butt kicked touring around the country on a bus. And well, now it happens, your parents drive you to a nice jazz club. What I'm saying is that the economics have enabled it's a two-pronged thing. The clubs are making money off of jazz musicians' parents. They're training a new audience. These are the economically more well-endowed adults whose children quickly go from teenagers playing for free, because remember, the musicians aren't being paid. These musicians, these great young teenagers, are now spending 4 years of their formative early career playing for nothing.
Right.
And at the same time, they're getting very good, and they're getting a lot of exposure, and they're getting all of the social media. I mean, you're under the spotlight on a professional stage with a real microphone, right? So suddenly your social media profile looks professional. Your experience is professional. You're not making any money. And now I'm theorizing a little bit here, but what happens is those kids continue on into a conservatory, if you will, college, university experience, where they continue to pay for their education while appearing in collegiate big band competitions around the world, on stage, on social media, right? You invite a big name jazz, a marquee name to play with the big band, like at one of these competitions. You get one of the Marsalis family, or Harry Connick, or Dee Dee Bridgewater. It's the right thing. I'm not criticizing these people. This is part of mentoring. This is all good. But what I'm saying is this is how one of the ways the economics have been shaped is because now we're dealing with an academic situation that's taking their money from the students' parents, and in the case of scholarships, from institutionalized funding, some of which is government. We could get into that. We're paying the marquee name to come and play with the big band. None of these musicians are getting paid at this point. None of the student musicians.
Right.
These student musicians are now playing on a very high, very technically high professional level of proficiency. They should be being paid. They should be out on their own doing gigs. But what happens is these kids graduate, now they're on their own, now they're getting gigs. Who's coming to their gigs? The peers of their peers from college and their parents. So they're carrying this economic elite class with them into the clubs that can afford to pay $50 tickets, $20, $30, $40, $50 tickets and food and drink to go hear the kind of jazz that is mostly, as you say, Amanda, intellectual. These jazz clubs today don't have dance floors.
No, they don't. No, you just, yeah.
And like Charlie Hunter said in the film, that's not a bad thing. We're not criticizing it. We're just identifying the component. A lot of people wonder why jazz isn't popular anymore, why it's niche, why there's jazz snobs, why it's so intellectual. Well, why is it intellectual? Because universities can't grade emotion. You can't have a professor come and tell you, you know what, you're not being sad enough, or I don't believe that you're really that happy. You can't tell someone that. I mean, you can, but you can't really.
No,
I think that quantifier changes for every person because we all have different emotions and feelings and our brains work differently.
And just the way in old theater, people would throw tomatoes because the audience was made up of everyone from the village, from the community who didn't care. If they boo, they'd hiss, or they cheer. Well, we don't have tomatoes in the audience, but in the old day, if you played in a big band and you toured, you were playing for people who worked their butts off all week long. They wanted to have a beer. They wanted to dance with their lady or their guy, and they wanted to feel good and happy. And if you didn't make them feel good, they'd either stand still, they'd walk out, they'd boo you, or they'd throw something at you. So as an artist, you learn quickly, oh, that doesn't work. So they were judging your emotional statement. They weren't in a classroom, but it was instantaneous. In the middle of a solo or a drum, you could see, this isn't working, I better change, or I'm in deep poo-poo. I'm either going to be fired or not asked back into this town or chased out of this town. So you figure something out fast that makes your audience happy, and that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And I want to touch on women in jazz and women, even maybe even in music in general.
Yeah.
When I think of women in jazz, be real honest, I think of like I said before, that singer on the small stage, and the only woman on the stage is the sultry, and I'm going to make, my view is a sultry Black woman who, sings. She's got a beautiful, sultry voice, and it's men are the play the instruments while the woman sings the song. And that is definitely not 100% true at all. But that's like where my brain goes. And so how does that sort of vibe that I think a lot of us are given in the media impact women in those jazz places, stages, cultures, whatever?
That's perfect. Yeah, you nailed it. Okay. It's tempting to go back and address that from the start of jazz, but let me start from the here and now. How does that affect men and women today, boys and girls? It has a deeply profound effect. And that's why it's important to balance that image with not only the reality of how things have changed, but with the exceptions to that image that really existed from the start. So first of all, again, there's nothing wrong with that. A Black sultry woman, any woman who wants to sing. One thing, because the image you just described, as real as it is, it gets attacked a lot now as like a cliche that we should avoid. It seems to diminish the woman in that instance. And let's be clear, a woman standing at the front of a band singing is just as much a musician as anyone else, and as just as powerful. And quite often, she's the leader of the band.
That's what I was going to say. She is the face of the band. She is in front.
Well, the singer is always the face of the band, but sometimes she's also the business owner, and that messes with people's conception too. I say that because it's important for people to remember there's no shame in being a singer, right?
Yeah.
And there's, arguably, one of the things I get into in my next film, We Are Here, Women in Jazz, is not only the obstacles women face in a male-dominated industry, but what is masculine and feminine energy. And Ingrid Jensen is the dean of jazz arts at the Manhattan School of Music. She's a great trumpet player as well. She talks about the fact that you cannot hear gender in jazz or in music.
I did see that. Yeah.
That clip actually appears
where she said, like, somebody gave her a compliment. Like, biggest compliment she got was somebody heard her song or something on the radio,
and I gotta know who that is.
And they pulled over, and waited until they found out who she was, because it wasn't her gender. It was her.
That's right.
It was her performance.
It was her sound.
Her skill, separate from her gender, her race, her age. Right. It was her music.
That's right, first. Amanda. Well, you guys really impressed me, the detail with which you watch these films. Thank you very much. Yes, that was Ingrid Jensen describing her experience. She was she was at a music convention, and one of the world's most famous jazz saxophone players at the time, he's passed away. His name was Michael Brecker. he pulled her aside to tell her that, what you just described. He's the one that told her, man, I heard you on the radio, not knowing who you were, and I had to pull over to find out who this trumpet player was. But my point is that she is correct about instrumental music. One of the great gifts, one of the areas in which it's okay to have gender differences is in the vocal range. Women sound like women and men sound like men most of the time. There's a few exceptions where we have men that sing so high they can be mistaken for a woman. But what I'm saying is that the masculine and feminine, or the genders, can be celebrated as being different and unique in a situation like that when we're talking about vocalists. Instrumentalists, no, you can't hear gender. You know, and that's hard to argue. I'd be interested to see someone who would argue it, but I haven't found it. Because there are men who play sweet and soft, if we agree that's a masculine thing, and there are women who can just, knock it into tomorrow with their power and strength and energy. So let me go back to what you said, though, Amanda, about it's very important where the image of the woman, the sultry black woman in front of a band singing, comes from, and what to do about it, if anything. I mean, the one thing to understand is that there was a time, specifically in America, back at the turn of the century, in the 1900s, and for more than a few decades following, where women culturally weren't supposed to do manly things. So instruments were gendered. Women were basically only encouraged to sing or play the piano, maybe the stringed instruments as well. We don't see a whole lot of stringed instruments in jazz. So talking about jazz, going back in history, we mostly do see women at the piano or singing. And again, that's simply the outlet they had that was culturally acceptable. What's interesting is there were a lot of women playing trumpet, playing drums. And what's fascinating is that one of the reasons I'm making these movies is because I didn't know any of this until just a few years ago. And that blew my mind, because I had spent decades playing as a professional musician, as a professional jazz drummer. I had mentors. I had gone to university. I dropped out of school after a couple years to start playing with these guys. But despite having been exposed to mentors, I read the books. I read jazz history books, autobiographies. I knew the people. I had never heard of these women. I had never heard of the all-women bands, they were called all-girl bands, that existed in the 1930s and 40s. They existed in the 30s, but when the men went to war in World War II, many of these all-women bands flourished across America. Hundreds of them, thousands of women playing big band music, everything, the bass, the drums, the trumpets, the sax, the trombones. And about 10 years ago, I dropped my daughter off at school, and I was a single father. I had full custody of my daughter. I was raising my kid as a jazz drummer. Took the afternoon off to go see what I thought was going to be a Miles Davis movie. And I walked into the movie theater in the middle of the day, and it was overrun with these people, and this film festival was going on. And instead of the Miles Davis movie, this movie called The Girls in the Band. And I'm in the theater, and I'm like, it's a jazz movie. And I'm like, well, this is interesting. My mind was blown. The director is Judy Chaikin. She was there. I got to meet her afterwards. And I saw this movie all about these women I had never heard of, despite having played jazz at that point, I had been playing for 30 years. And how can this be? How could I have gone to university? How could I have been playing with some of the greats? How could I have been reading books on my own that I got at the library? This is pre-internet.
Right.
How could I have never heard of the international sweethearts of rhythm, for example, the Melody Maker, all of these bands that these women had played in, and these women, Dottie Dodgen, Vi Red, Valida Snow. There's so many amazing women. And so that was one question. Why haven't we heard about the ones that were there? Because if we haven't heard of them, it's easy to assume that all women were doing what you said, Amanda, that they were just singers or piano players. And okay, so there's that component. The fact is women, and okay, and here's another one. When I watched that movie, that triggered an old book I had read by the Grateful Dead's drummer. Right? Rock and roll drummer Mickey Hart from the Grateful Dead wrote a book many years ago, I think in the 90s. He wrote 2 books, so I can't remember the title, but something about the history of rhythm. He was the one that, for the first time in my awareness, published the fact that women were some of the earliest known drummers in the history of mankind. Going back to ancient Babylonian cultures, men and women had duties that were divided by gender, but they were equal in importance. So the men, for example, were tasked with doing the administrative duties of government. The women were tasked with doing the spiritual duties, making music, drumming. They were equally important. The women were the drummers. And you can see this in some of the early stone carvings, women with the tambourines. And so anyway, I saw this movie. It sparked the memory of that book. And I realized, okay, I gotta find out what's going on with women in jazz here.
Right.
You mentioned the music and the women and the spiritual piece. And that's also like in indigenous culture here in the United States, women held a more higher place of esteem, I think, than women in general do in today's culture.
That's quite right.
Again, I'm making stereotyping things, but
and it's good that I appreciate that you say that, because in general, when people speak of any group, it's tempting to speak in generalizations, and oftentimes we have to for convenience of the conversation. I do know that Native American indigenous people appreciate when we acknowledge the fact that we're going to generalize, because not every Native nation played flute as their primary. Maybe they were more about singing, or they all have their different flavors.
Comparing, right, like people that live in Kenya versus Morocco, like they're all in the same.
They're Africans,
but they're not the same culture. They're very
vastly different.
So I acknowledge that. That's why I said very, very stereotypically all of those things here.
Well, okay, so it's true. It's a generalization, but it's also quite true from all of my experience with Native tribes. I have friends ever since I was a kid. My dad did a lot of work with Native nations, and then my more recent research is the matriarchal component within Native cultures is quite strong. Delbert Anderson is a Diné or Navajo trumpet player who appears in my most recent films, Echoes of Tradition, and he'll also be appearing in Women in Jazz, because he speaks to that. He speaks to the importance of the woman, the mother, is a leader. Very much so, the feminine energy, the mother is not only valued, but her leadership is necessary in a large component of their life. As the leader of the family, as the keeper of stories, the narrative of history. Obviously the men would go fight the battles. So men were leaders in the sense of being warriors. But when they came home, the woman was the leader of the household. So there was a balance, like the ancient Babylonians. There was a balance that was respected. It was beyond needed. It's just a simple matter of the fact. There are people, like if you're a medicine man or a medicine woman, that's your talent. That's your gift. You're highly regarded for that. If you're, you know what I mean? Everyone's gift was respected in the same way that the two-spirit people, what we might call trans or gay, were sometimes referred to as two-spirit, and they were seen as having just as an important special gift to bring to the community. But so going back to the importance of women, yes, as you might have seen in the one clip of from Echoes of Tradition, we go into a Muskogee stomp dance demonstration, and the speaker lets the people know that in our tradition, the women play the percussion and the men do the singing. That's just one example. That's not all Native. But there again, the women have the duty to the drumming, to the rhythm.
Right.
And it's not that men can't do rhythm. It's just that women set the tone. Okay. And people used to ask me how I became a drummer, and it was obvious to me. Rhythm comes for human beings anyway, and probably all life forms that come from a mother. Our first rhythm is the heartbeat of our mother. You know, when we're in the womb, we're surrounded by liquid that's pulsing with our mother's heartbeat. Boom, 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 boom,
Right.
boom, boom.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So the women and rhythm are inextricable, you know.
Again, this is my experience was I breastfed both of my children. And so like especially evenings, like putting them to bed was my time with them. I'm not a great singer. I'm not even a good singer.
I'm not either.
Like
I'm not.
maybe average, maybe not even that. But I would sing lullabies. Like that's what I did when I put my kids to bed at night. And I was there's a Dixie Chick song or Chick song. Sorry, I've got a but it's a chick song that's
Is it not Dixie Chicks anymore?
no, they took the Dixie away for the
That was back in
yeah. Like it's Lady A instead of Lady Antebellum now.
Yeah.
Are we allowed to say Dixieland music? Or is Dixie a bad word now?
See, this is the
I
thing.
don't know.
Well, we could
so
have a whole
weird.
conversation
Yeah.
about like what it is and
I will always sing Dixieland
There's-
Tonight by Alabama. That's the greatest song on
Right,
earth. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but one of the I was listening to the Chicks. It was just what was the playlist that I decided I was going to listen to, and there's a song called Godspeed, and it's a song that I used to sing to my son, and I was picking him up from his football game. It was an away game, so I was picking him up, and I hearing this song, and it is bringing back like those memories of what it was like to be the mother of an infant, because it's a mother of an infant is very different than the mother of teenagers.
God, yeah.
It is like I can't hold my son, you know, he's
Not
taller than
anymore.
I am and bigger, you know, all of those things. But you know, I loved the way that music was such a part of my relationship with my kids when they were little, and it still is in a lot of ways. I mean, I embarrass them sometimes by singing loudly in the car with them, but that same son, the other day we were in the car and he was like, "Can I have your phone? I want to play a song." And so I handed it to him, and he will kill me for saying this, but he put on Taylor Swift's 22 and we sang at the top of our lungs. Like you would not believe. But then he was like, "Oh, I'm going to play our song." And when he said that, I thought he meant Taylor Swift's Our Song, because
It's the same
that is
time.
a Taylor Swift. But no, he meant our song, like the song that he and I share, which is Carly Rae Jepsen, Call Me Maybe. Because when he was little, when that song first came out, he loved it and he sang it, and we have a dance to it and the whole thing. So like that music is a special part of my relationship with him, but even other people. I think music connects us in ways that other things don't, because you can sing together, you can especially on car, like in road trips, right? Like how much fun is it to like sing at the top of your lungs with your best friend or your kid or your partner and be goofy together while singing a favorite song, and it connects you and it bonds you in ways that maybe listening to a book or a talk radio program doesn't. I don't know. There's something spiritual.
You're, oh, you're Amanda. That's so deep and so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. You've touched upon arguably one of the greatest gifts that the feminine mother nurturing energy is, and that's something that's not given enough credit for shaping the lives of men and women. But our ability to live a life of humanity, of care and civility, I think has a lot to do with that early bonding with our mothers. And if a mother takes the time to nurture a child that way, we default to that. We've been shown it. It exists for us to access again in our lives. And what you shared is so beautiful, and I'm not going to go down to that path of spirituality too much or we're going to start crying. But the gift of voice, the gift of singing, having a child close to your body while you sing to them, that's what all of the great jazz instrumentalists, I think, are attempt to recreate at some point in their quest for beauty. And this is one of the powers, one of the gifts, one of the influences women had on the birth of jazz. I'm convinced of this. I haven't seen anyone write on this because it's maybe so subjective, but during my research, I've noticed that a lot of great men who have been recognized as important innovators of jazz, and they are, and they were, there's no doubt that their music, and oftentimes they received their first musical lessons from their mother or from an aunt or from a grandmother. It's consistent. There are so many women who nurtured boys who became innovative men in jazz. There are innovative women who became contributing musicians as well. But I'm just speaking to one of the elements that women gave directly to jazz was the voice. And showing men a way that they can access vulnerability, so that if a man wants to express feelings of hurt, traditionally men aren't taught to do that, right?
Yeah.
No, instead of doing that, I'm just going to hit you or smash something, crash a drum. Well, for these great lyrical jazz men to do what they do, I think part of that was having been shown and have been given access to that feminine place, that safe space, and that can't be emphasized enough. I think someone I interviewed, I think it may have been I can't remember if it was Julia Keefe or maybe Ingrid Jensen. Someone spoke to the idea that even having the presence of a woman on stage with the band helps bring something different out of, maybe it was Andromeda Ture. Just having a feminine presence on stage can help bring something else out of the men that may not have been there. It can change, it can actually create a greater sum of the parts by having an inclusivity with the feminine energy. But here's an example. This isn't the example. This goes back to what you said. Singers are often underappreciated for what they contribute. When we look to the birth of jazz, we want to look for that trumpet player or that piano player that created this new genre. I think it comes down to the drummers and the singers. The singers, the drummers obviously giving shape to a new rhythmic concept, and the drummers literally giving voice to a new melodic concept. And someone like Mamie Smith, Alberta Hunter, these are two women at the genesis of jazz who, if you Wikipedia them, they get labeled as blues singers a lot. Because remember, before 1915, there was no jazz music. But here's the thing, Louis Armstrong, Jelly Roll Morton, a number of these early jazz instrumentalists heard these amazingly powerful women singing. And what these women, this gets into the sexual, political freedoms that women, and especially women of color, were now able to express. On stage as singers. They may not be able to be accepted as a drummer, but they could sit up there, and the way they held their bodies, the way they delivered a song, and the messages they sang, and the improvisation they brought into the lyric to speak to the people in their audience at the moment, or to speak to the times in their city. They could take a traditional lyric or a ditty, if you will, and improvise, throw it, right? They would improvise lyrics that spoke to the guy in the front row, or spoke maybe circumtutiously to the owner of the club, or to the mayor of the city. And these young Louis Armstrongs heard that, and that sense of singing and improvisation and making something that relates to your community in the here and now is something that the early women, the blue, if you want to call them the blues shouters, but really these women who brought blues into a jazz dynamic. And this gets deep because, again, what is jazz? Are these blues singers? Well, there are purists, jazz purists, writing in the 1930s who wanted to eliminate anything but what they saw as jazz. So a lot of these women who were bridging the blues and the gospel and the native and the hymns into something new were being written off as, oh, those are just blues singers. And yet the Louis Armstrongs and the Sidney Bechet's and the Jelly Roll Mortons, who were becoming known as virtuosic solo improvisers, grew up listening to a lot of vocal music, much of which was sung by these powerful women who were expressing, who weren't just like riffing on songs, they were expressing the pent-up energies of a people needing to be free, politically, physically, sexually, the freedom to choose who you love. For oppressed women especially, remember, who they loved, who their sexual partners were, was dictated by society. Now they're starting to say, you know what? I get to choose who I get to love, who I get to sleep with. That was a big deal. So there was a big sexual freedom component in the music that was becoming jazz as well. Some intellectual, people like to say, no, jazz wasn't about sex. Jazz is about,
I mean, one could argue that all music is about sex, but that's a conversation for another. Or it's at least sensual.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Especially when we're talking about dance. Okay, James, go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Ben. Okay, so do we have time for one more question?
Absolutely. And don't hesitate to call me back. Let's do another one.
I would love.
Please. No, because we haven't even begun.
I'm having so much fun.
Yeah,
this is.
But first things first.
I have a list of questions and notes that I made for like names of artists and to look up and check out and books to read, and I don't always do that, but I have a whole note taking pad over here.
All right. Okay, so Ben, first of all, can you please apologize to your wife for us keeping you so long? We're sorry.
You know what? James, I will, but my wife is such a strong-willed. Here's what she did.
Yeah, because I was so worried.
I thought she was just going to go shopping. We need eggs and coffee and come back. She said, you know what, Ben, I've taken the kids. We're on an adventure.
Yes. Okay, so we're not going to keep you any longer than we have to. But yeah, I do want to ask you this question because this is the last question we have for our guest. And this is going to be the hardest question we've asked today. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Are you ready? Okay. So, is there one band, artist, or album of any genre, anything you want, that you can listen to, that you can't tell me, Amanda, your wife, or your children how it makes you feel deep inside your soul?
Say the last part, James. Listen to one record that, and then what about all of us?
It's that music that like you can't tell anyone. It's not that it makes you sad or happy. It just touches
It's
your
like
soul in a way
unexplainable.
that
Is
you
there?
can't express. Like it's that one song you
Oh,
go to because
It just speaks to your
it
soul.
just speaks to your soul. It's that or artist even.
wow. Wow. So let me see if I understand the question right. Is there one song? We're not talking about an album, it's a song. Is
Song,
there a song?
artist,
Or
or album.
it could be an artist.
Oh,
Could
What
be an
who
artist, or it
is
could be an album.
wow, that's you really got me.
I told you this was the hardest question, you know?
Okay, okay, is there a song? Let me understand the second
Yeah.
component of this
Okay. Okay.
that exemplifies the unspoken. Is that what you're saying?
like
To
your
you.
What?
soul. Like if there's a song that basically is your soul, that sounds maybe bigger, but that song that like or artist or album that is the one that you go to and it it does something to your insides that you can't explain to anyone else. Like it just
It's so
makes you
powerful
feel
that you
all the
can't
feels,
explain
but you can't
anything about it. Yeah.
put the feels into words because it's just the
Wow.
feels.
Oh, I wish I had more time to think of this.
Oh,
That's the point. No,
yeah. We caught you off guard,
Yeah,
man. Yeah.
I can.
you know, this is really weird, and I'm just because I'm just gonna have to go with my instinct. And you know what's really funny about that question, James? Thank you for putting me on the spot, number one,
You're welcome.
because because I did that. I actually did that to the people in Jazztown, and I would ask them. I asked him, could you play me something right now that represents who you are in the moment?
Right.
You know, and and you kind of asked me to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the name. I'm going to try to pull up the name of this song. It's difficult for me because this is Armenian. This has almost nothing to do with jazz, but this is what popped in my head, and it may not be the best answer. So if we get together again, I might come back and share something else. But it's important for me to share this Armenian duduk player's name with you. Now, the duduk is an ancient flute-like instrument. His name is Gasparian. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Jivan, the last name is Gasparyan, I believe.
I found
Gasparian.
him. Yeah, you spelled it correctly.
Okay, okay. If you'll give me a minute, I might be able to find a particular song that just, if I could use swear words, I would say it
Oh, please do.
me up. That it really ucks me up. Like it takes me on a journey that's so deep that I feel like someone sucked me out of my body and took me on a whirlwind tour of the universe and brought me back. And and there is jazz music that has done that to me, but like I said, when you asked me that question and I understood it, this is who popped into my mind for some reason.
Perfect.
Okay, so let me see if I can find the song if I have it in my playlist. Um,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, take your time,
I can
man.
start listing songs that he's right. I've got them all pulled up. What's interesting is he is 92 years old,
Wow.
or
I,
he died at 92 3
Okay.
years ago. Sorry.
Okay.
yeah, he passed. He passed away. Um,
Yeah.
Um, they took my love away. Nizani. I'm just naming random
Yeah.
songs at this
That's
point.
fine. Yeah. Yeah, because I think that the reason why I wanted to know from you is because I mean I'm interested in what makes you like I don't want to say cry more, but it's like it feels so deep in
Tick.
so yes,
I want to know what makes people tick.
right.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's
Or happy, or like a go-to song where you can just oh my god, that's so good,
yeah. I'm going to give you two because what I found, these are great. What I found, it kind of ties into to your lullaby story, Amanda, with your son. Is I actually one of the first albums I released under my own name is kind of an electronica new age album called Lost Lullaby.
Oh well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I have been coming to grips with the. I've been trying to understand my own motivation for a life in music, and it goes back to. This might sound cheesy, but I had a wind-up doll, and who I'm anthropomorphizing her. It was a Raggedy Annie doll, and she had a music box inside of her, and I would wind that up. And to this day, I've never found that doll. I don't know the melody, but that has been the lullaby. And and I think that part of my musical quest has always been trying to rediscover and find that lost lullaby. And so the people that I would refer to you are people whose music gets me close to that, puts me in that same state of, when you're a child, if you're able, for those of you who have memories or feeling essences of being young, pre-verbal memories are fascinating because how do you describe what you're feeling and seeing if you don't have words? But your brain and your consciousness, your spirit, it finds a way. And sound and visual shape are two things. I think that's why I make movies to this day, because I'm connected to the sounds and visions that I first saw in my pre-verbal states. And it's really bizarre stuff, but it's there. And these musicians are people who are able to take me back into a pre-verbal state where like we're just floating. We've become decoupled from our bodies, and we're in that embiotic fluid of early life. And Gasparian's The Duke can do that to me. Also, okay, so while I search for the name of that song, there is another interesting song. Nancy Wilson is a singer that has taken me on that journey through some of her stuff. I'll give you a name of a song that's really kind of a weird song. It's always, let me make sure I get the right name. It's a haunting song that she plays with Cannonball Adderley. And it's written by Joe Zawinul. Whoops, wait, hold on a second here. Let me, it's either called Old Man or Old Country. And there's a haunting quality to it. Are you there?
Yeah.
Am I there?
Yeah,
Here's a song called The Old Country. That it's fitting for what we've been talking about today. Nancy Wilson sings it with Cannonball Adderley. There's a version that's just, it's not written by Jill Zawinul. I think this is written by Cannonball Adderley's brother, Nat. Yes, it's written by his brother, Nat Adderley, who was a cornet player. And it's just like, where did this come from? Like, this is one of those songs where if you listen to the album, it's a great album. Nancy Wilson with Can. So it's this great, cool jazz album, and everything's jazz, and we're happy, and we're moving along, and then all of a sudden this song comes on. I'm like, holy,
right. Yeah.
Where did this come from? And if you listen to it with headphones, it ends up. Well, I won't say anymore. I'll let you, because you should discover the song. But
Yeah.
that's one of those songs where I can listen to it over and over, especially like if I'm traveling on an airplane and I put it in my earbuds and I just because when you're traveling, you have this
Yeah.
disconnected feeling, again, you're separated from the umbilical cord of your existence. You're about to embark into some unknown place or right? Traveling songs. That would be an interesting podcast. The songs we listen to that transport
Right.
us.
Yes. Yes.
I
So the Armenian flute Duke song, man, I gotta get the specific track for you,
Okay.
and I'm having a hard time. Talk to me. Talk
well,
amongst yourselves while I Google search it. Because
Okay.
here's the thing. I'm actually using this track. I'm actually trying to get the rights to use this track of this Duke in this surreal, almost David Lynch-like scene that I've made in one of my short narrative films that no one knows this side of me yet. They've only seen like music videos and documentaries, but
Right.
I've been secretly making these little narrative films that tell a very different story. And there's a very strange scenario that has to do with a twist. I'm making a movie called for right now it's titled The Unwound, and it's the forgotten lives of wind up music toys. Like snow globes
mhm.
Yes. Yes.
that have been left in someone's attic, and these snow globes have they've sang their last note and they've been abandoned. But we in my film we rediscover them and they tell the story and we go into the story of each different wind up thing, and in one scene we go back into the life of Santa Claus,
Ooh,
and
I
and
love it already. I love everything about it already.
So I had a snow globe. That my grandmother gave me, and it was a wind up, and it had a unicorn in it, and I loved it. And at some point, it was in a box, and it got cracked, and the snow globe broke, and all the water
Yeah.
left it.
oh
And
man,
I, in a fit of rage, threw the whole thing away because I was so upset that I lost this thing. Sorry, my grandmother gave me.
oh,
And it wasn't even the snow, it was the music. I couldn't tell you what the song was anymore,
yeah, yeah,
but there was something about like that was like she got it for me and I listened to it with her
uh-huh.
and you said that and I'm like, "Oh, isn't it wild how like you said, old wind up toys
Yeah.
and the
There's something.
songs that they
It's a
sorry.
magic spirit. It's the oddest thing that a hunk of metal, because those things are basically metal, but they're transporting spirit to us.
It,
And then, of course, there's the associative thing, you and your grandmother in that special time. Um, yeah, that's powerful stuff.
I mean, we touched on. I think music is just it brings us together, and it tells stories beyond what the story of the song is. Like you said, the songs we travel to, the songs that we dance to at our weddings, or we sing to our kids when we're putting them to bed. Like songs and music are about more than the song and the music. It's about the connection that we create and the relationship, maybe just to ourselves, but how we felt in that moment. And it's, I'm
The
having
magic.
all kinds of feels tonight.
Right.
Yeah,
That hit me.
wow,
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
that's beautiful. That's
And
intense.
not that anyone actually cares all that much, but here, this is my grandma. It's a terrible
Oh,
picture. Oh,
yeah.
it's so take a picture.
Wow.
This was at her 100th birthday party.
100th.
Um,
Wow.
and it is one of my see if that's there.
Yep, that's better. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's my
Look at
sister,
her.
my grandma, me. That would have been 2017.
Yeah.
At our 100th birthday party. And
Wow.
she
Yeah.
was not a music person at
No.
all. She
Really. Oh, okay.
no, she was a good old Southern woman. Come on.
There you go.
but
So,
but
yeah.
there were little bits and pieces of music that that was one of the very few music things that she gifted me, and it was huge.
Um,
And now I'm sad
That's
are gone.
wow. That's an amazing
Sorry, I
story.
didn't mean to bring things down, but it's not, because it's what a
That's
beautiful
beautiful.
gift that she gave me with that memory. Even if I don't have it, I still have it
right.
because I have it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things about music is you can kind of take those songs with you everywhere, right? They're in your head. You don't even need electricity or a record player or your phone or whatever. You can sing a song because it's like those old stories. Sorry, we're just going around in circles here. It's the
Yeah.
same as the storytelling, right? Jazz is about the storytelling and being able to take that with you to different places. Why drums got smaller, why, you know, all of that. I don't know. Sorry. I'm making weird
That's great.
connections in my
Oh, it's all
head.
right.
No, you're free forming. You're taking a solo. It's awesome.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just over here
No,
talking, thinking.
you're absolutely right. No, you brought it full circle. You nailed it. I mean, it's the songs carry their own stories, and if we retell them honestly with authenticity, we end up adding part of our own story to it. How it makes us feel, or how we add to the narrative, and that's a beautiful, powerful thing. We can, it's like we can retell the story of our grandmother in any number of ways, right?
Oh, yeah,
That's
there are
the
other
beauty of
stories
it.
I could tell you about that woman. She was fierce, and uh my daughter is named after her, and my daughter turned 17 yesterday. So
Oh,
my
wow.
grandmother her birthday was September 29th, my daughter's September 25th. And I was so frustrated. I was like, if you would have just waited 4 more days to get here, you would have shared your birthday with your great grandma who also shares your name. But no, she had to be
Oh, she had to be early.
early.
Yeah. Which is
She had
fine, I
to
guess.
come in her when she was ready and not when I wanted her. That
Right.
darn.
And that never works out.
She's still strong-willed, that
There you
one.
go.
I
Yep.
I mean, in all the best ways.
Nice.
So I really loved this. I love talking to you, Ben. This was so much fun. And it was like an improv, right? We just kind of went where the things went, like jazz sometimes
We,
does.
we jazzed
Go
it
with
up.
the flow and see what happens.
We did. I'm very thankful and appreciative of your willingness to speak with me, and I'm quite frankly flattered by the amount of detail you spent, watching my films. I really appreciate that.
Oh, there were I feel like I'm geeking out a little bit because I really enjoyed them to the point where, okay, I'm gonna fully admit that my intention was to listen while I was doing other things. But I kept coming back and having to rewind because I was like, I
So
missed something, darn it. And so then finally I just had
right?
to
Yeah.
stop doing dishes and laundry and watch. And as for someone with ADHD to take the
Wow.
That says a lot.
it's hard for me to fully express how big that is for me to be so
Wow.
fascinated that I wanted to sit down and actually, and I could watch. I didn't even have my phone out. It was, I'm telling you, I wish that you knew how big this was.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'll never be able to explain that to you, and that's fine. But
Wow.
there was
I get
just something,
it.
I don't
If
know.
I think I get a piece of what you're saying. I think that's incredible.
There was
Thank you.
something about and it was specifically more with your most recent film.
The Echoes of Tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I think what I kept rewinding over and over again was and I apologize,
So,
sir,
wait,
I don't remember your name. The is it flautist? Is that
Carlos
where
Nakai.
and he would sing,
Uh-huh.
right? And then he would mirror back right in the moment what he was
Yes.
And I kept being like, wait. And I had to like re-listen because I was like, that is amazing how he is getting the same
Yes.
tone feel from an instrument as from his voice.
Yes.
And it was amazing. And so I kept,
Wow.
and I was
Oh,
like,
I just got the shivers, and like a cool breeze just went over my
oh,
whole body when you said that.
Hey Ben, you know why Amanda can't tell you exactly how she feels? Because when words fail, music speaks. There you go. It all.
Da-da-da-da.
thank you.
Boom. Yeah. So, all right,
I
Ben.
love it.
All right, man. So we're on Instagram and TikTok and all that fun stuff. Were you?
Okay, beautiful.
Yeah. Are you, no, are you there?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I'm on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. Basically at Be Making Music.
Okay.
BMAKI. At Be Making Music is my YouTube. And I think that should take you to most everything else, or Ben Makinen. Go ahead.
I was gonna say your website, benmakinen.com.
Yeah, right.
Well,
That's
We can order. And then I saw your T-shirt. I'm gonna have to order me one of those because that's fantastic, dude. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I've got T-shirts and mugs at my website, benmakinen.com.
And I'm definitely going to order a hat too because the hat is I love jazz. Yeah. Oh, I got it. I love hats. So I'll be
Oh, cool, James. You saw the new, I just designed that hat about 2 weeks ago, the I Love Jazz one.
Yeah, I love it. I love.
Dude, that's the newest one.
Yeah. Nice.
Oh, right on. Thank you, James.
I may need to get that for
Right. Yeah, we're all going to do
our
it.
arts and jazz festival here in town is next weekend or the weekend after. And so Denton has like this arts and jazz festival. I think it's 25, 30 years now. It's been around. And it's huge. There's 5 or 6 different stages. It's incredible.
Wow. Next time I should get a bundle of these shirts and hats for you to sell at the fest.
Oh,
yeah.
that'd be great.
Oh, it would be. I'll get with you
Yeah.
at a later date. Not while
Okay.
we're recording.
We've got a lot of. It feels to me like we planted the seeds here, and we've got a relationship now.
Oh yeah.
I just
Amazing.
loved this interview. I enjoy interviewing people, but this one, for whatever reason, I just connected with the ideas, the music, and I'll admit, I'm not a big jazz listener. I listen to it and I love it. And then I kind of forget it exists because it's not in a playlist that I listen to over and over and over again.
Okay, so
now I'm like, I just need a jazz playlist.
Okay, so let me talk on that real quick, Ben, and then we gotta let you go. When you contacted us, I was amazed about what you did and what you do, and I'm like Amanda. I really don't understand. I didn't understand jazz and how what its purpose was. That's why I wanted you to come on and talk to us about it because I'm genuinely interested in it, and I feel the need to learn more about what I don't know, and that's when you come in, and because I think you're a genius, dude. Because what you do is very, very powerful. Your documentary is amazing. It's a masterpiece. I think it's one of the best documentaries I've ever watched in my life. I'm not joking. I'm 44, so I've seen a lot of stuff. But I'm amazed about your knowledge and thank you so much for coming on. This is great.
Well, that leaves me nearly speechless. Thank you so much, James. That means a lot to me. I'm on this journey of learning as well, and I'm so appreciative to find people like you. I think when people like us come together, we help each other. We lift each other up on our journeys.
Right.
So I'm so equally so appreciative of you guys, and I'm blown away how much you both have jumped into this jazz thing. And thanks again for having me. Let's do more.
So fun.
Yes,
we need to do another
episode
or 2, or just hang out.
Hang out one day.
I wrote down, like, is there a history of jazz class I could take? Like,
I'm sure there is. I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
I feel like I got a history lesson today too, which is. I love learning.
Well, there's plenty more of it, and there's plenty more to go, and we've got more to dig. I'm digging deeper back, and
I can't wait. to see what's coming next.
Right.
Real,
you.
yes, there are two women today doing some modern things with jazz that you might connect with easier than going back. One is named Melanie Charles. I don't have a specific, I saw her play live in New York and she blew my mind because of the way the way she and her band were mixing like hip hop and machines, sampling machines along with acoustic instruments and her voice and her message. So she's sampling jazz via hip hop with a jazz band, and she's singing about her own place in contemporary society to you right now here. So I was like, wow. While she was sampling some of the old great jazz vocalists, the black sultry singers you talk about, she was channeling them literally through these sampling machines while her husband's on piano, badass drummer. Okay, so she's like what I see as kind of an innovator, trying to keep things using progressive current technology, telling a story that's based in the past but with her own. And another woman who's doing things that aren't maybe recognizable as jazz anymore, her name is Veronica Swift. And Veronica Swift was born into jazz royalty, became famous playing with like Wynton Marsalis and Chris Bodie, and a legitimate straight ahead jazz singer who realized her passion is rock and opera. So she's touring the world stages now, almost like Janis Joplin on steroids meets Billie Holiday, channeling.
Oh my gosh.
Channeling Duke Ellington, so.
Yeah.
And
Swift.
Veronica, I'm making a movie about her too, called Rise of the Transgenre.
Ooh.
And
I'm just not going to sleep tonight. It's fine. I'm just all night finding new music. I don't need to sleep.
Hey man, go on
Overrated.
Go on like what do you call it, like a doom scroll? You can doom scroll me.
I'm gonna but it's gonna be like I don't even think this would be a doom. Like this is gonna be intentional research,
like
not thoughtless.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm such a nerd today. I'm like, I'm so excited.
I'm so excited.
I feel like I'm the biggest nerd right now because I'm like, okay, and the name of that book and the name of this artist. Oh,
you know what? I kind of feel like we're back in high school in someone's basement, having this talk.
Yes, exactly, dude. That's a great. Yeah.
And we have taken up so much of your time, and I so appreciate.
Let me close up the show. Hang on a minute.
Yeah.
Let me close up the show so we can talk more later. Okay. All right. And so for everybody listening, always go to Makinen.com. Did I say it right again?
Makinen.
I'm so sorry, dude. I'm okay. All right. .com. Buy all of his stuff. Buy his CDs, hats, shirts. And will the documentary be on sale sometime soon?
Jazztown is available on Apple TV, Amazon Prime, Google Play, and Vudu.
All right, so everybody watch it. This is the best documentary ever made. I'm not lying. Okay, so everybody watch it. And
thank you, Jim. Thank you, Amanda.
Sir. So, okay, you also thanks again for listening and watching on YouTube. And always remember, when words fail,
music speaks.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much.